So are we entering to an end of globalism, of globalization, or what does that mean for the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think, globalization as we knew it, at least since 1990, I think that has certainly come to an end. It doesn't mean that, a full reversal of everything of it, but it will certainly take a very different shape. And what we see, if we look at the empirical data of how companies are doing business, we have to acknowledge that, a large part of globalization was actually intra-company trade. So companies setting up shop in different parts of the world, leveraging differences in labor force costs, etc., pp. And then, sending stuff around the globe as part of their intra-company operations. And then at some point they sell it to customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this was like 40% of all global trade was actually intra-company trade. And as companies now face all these geopolitical risks, like, oh, I cannot, export my stuff to this country because the US has just implemented new controls, or, there's a major disruption and it's too risky to ship stuff around, the Suez, whatever. Companies change their intra-company patterns and start to adapt more to what they perceive as geopolitical risks and try to minimize them. And that basically leads to a pattern where you have companies changing their structure to be more aligned with the geopolitical fault lines. So you organize your trade more in the geopolitical blocks that are emerging. So you try to do more in the US if you want to sell in the US because of the threat of tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
Tariffs, for example, you put more assets close to the US or in aligned countries. By the way, this is why the whole Canada and Mexico stuff is so toxic to companies.
Yeah,
because they thought they're secure if they put manufacturing in Mexico, that they could serve the U.S. market, which seems to be dubious. But we see this realignment, right? And if, for example, if you want to, as a Western company, if you want to continue to sell in China, many companies are actually doubling down in China. They're saying like, I want to sell, I cannot afford to lose the Chinese market, and if there are all these restrictions, I need to put more assets into China. So I will develop products in China for China. And these products are becoming more Chinese because you need to adhere to Chinese standards. You need to adhere to Chinese tastes. And you basically start developing specific products in China for China in the future based on this Chinese IT stack. So you will use Chinese apps to sell your stuff. You will use a separated IT infrastructure to set up your company in China because you don't want to export data anymore, which becomes more and more difficult. And you use Chinese semiconductors because there might be an encryption requirement that's basically forces you to use specific Chinese trusted platform modules or the like. So means companies are adapting their operations and how they look like and how they govern themselves according to these geopolitical fault lines. I think that's the new globalization we see. So it doesn't mean that everything happens in one country, but it just means that the value chains are becoming more attuned to these geopolitical fault lines.
I mean, that's why, for example, the German auto industry put factories in China to serve the Chinese market, which is one of the biggest one, right? And that fact that now China has also a very big and emerging auto industry has also outperformed the German cars.
Yeah, so certainly lots of things happening, right? So the relationship between Chinese local partners of German car manufacturers has changed, right? So if you look at the latest announcements, you see that Volkswagen is partnering with Chinese small companies like XPeng. Before, the Chinese partner was there to distribute and to scale the global product that Volkswagen was selling in China. And now we have basically the Chinese partner taking the lead in development, and Volkswagen is there to add scale and production heft to it. So the relationship with regard to who's actually innovating and who's driving technologies has changed radically. That's one trend that's happening. And then you have this additional complexity of cars are now computers on wheels, right? And all the restrictions currently implemented in China on so-called secure and controllable technology, that's a term in Chinese tech regulation, basically means You have to use Chinese encryption. You have to store your data on Chinese servers. You cannot export data anymore to your headquarters, metadata, whatever. So you basically have a situation where you cannot sell your global stock car anymore without any effort to localize in China. And that basically means the cost envelope of selling a car in China has become much bigger. And that means that the money you earn in China, you have to invest more in China to stay competitive. And that means you cannot subsidize your global operations, which are more costly, with the money you have made in China, right? So Volkswagen closing down manufacturing here in Germany, I think it's pretty clear that one of the reasons is that China also needs to invest more. Volkswagen needs to invest more in China to stay competitive there. So they cannot, send back that much cash as in the past. So you can see that even the corporate financing streams are also localizing and basically also becoming bipolar. In a nutshell, you could argue that companies become, as the world becomes more bipolar in geopolitical terms, companies also become bipolar. To stay in China and to maintain your rest of world operations, your company structure, your finance structure, your product development, your IP development, everything also becomes kind of bipolar. And you have this new, strange kind of companies emerging, which have two separate entities under one roof.
So basically, if you say Volkswagen, basically you have the German one that runs across the world, except China. In China, you have the Chinese Volkswagen, basically.
Okay. And it even goes all the way up to marketing, right? So Audi just launched a new brand in China, right? So Audi got rid of the 4 circles logo.
Okay,
and
didn't know that.
New brand and logo in China. And
do you know why it was maybe like misinterpreted, the logo there, or means something else in
they had a little bit of a problem that Audi was the favorite car of the Communist Party cadres in the past, so it had this kind of, it's no longer cool. It was the car of the old apparatchiks.
Okay.
And they had difficulties in competing in brand recognition with the new cool BYD and others. So they decided to actually abandon a well-known brand to become more fashionable, which is quite radical. Lots of people criticize it. I'm not a marketing expert. I can tell. I can only say, like, even on the marketing level, you see a bipolarization. Right?
But for example, in terms of, for example, like global companies and Germany, I mean, Germany's biggest engine is the car industry. By growing in China, but staying in China, the money stays in China, the technology stays in China. What benefits brings that to the German entity and the German state? Maybe nothing, or is there still an advantage to grow in the Chinese market?
Well, I mean, companies try to protect their market access, right? So they will fight on all levels in order to somewhat make operations profitable and somewhat benefit from what you actually do in China, and maybe transfer knowledge and the like, access to key technologies like batteries, participating in a Chinese innovation ecosystem to benefit from it. This is what companies attempt to do. But of course, it just got much more difficult to be profitable on both sides of the stack. So the benefits for companies in general, I mean, lower margins, definitely, and also lower tax incomes for German government, right? So that's the thing. Like a bipolar world is less efficient than a unipolar world, and companies can tell, and probably government can tell at some point as well. It's interesting that, just again, I always try to come back to technology history because I think there's a lot to learn. And I think IT is not that special that you cannot compare to other waves of general purpose technologies in the past. So we have one example in the book about Ford operations during the Second World War. So Ford company had a German subsidiary based in my hometown, Cologne. And when, declaration of war 41, Ford continued to operate in Germany under a shell organization, which was put in a trusteeship, very complicated legal stuff. But in the end, it became a bipolar company with Ford US producing for the US Army. And you had Ford Germany. Guess what they did? They produced for the German Army. So 40% of all German Wehrmacht trucks employed against the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa were actually Ford trucks, which is absolutely crazy if you think about it.
Yeah.
But this shows how radically pragmatic companies are when it comes to, protecting their market access. After Second World War, both parts merged again and went along, right? And no one was keen talking about it. It all came out in the 2000s when there was you might remember the discussion about forced labor compensation. And so Ford put in a commission and they found out all this stuff and they published a report, which is online. You can read it. So it was this kind of late reckoning with corporate history and how big the difference can be between patriotism on the one side and how corporations feel they have to protect their market access. So it's a quite dark chapter of corporate history, but I think it serves as a reminder that the world looks very differently when you are a corporate manager and you try to protect your market access.